completely barred. So all the suits of civil nature is maintainable before the civil court. You know well, civil nature means the property dispute or other disputes touching the person's honor or the other easement rights. All incidental rights touching the property issues will come within the definition of civil right. Even though civil right has not been defined anywhere in the CPC, we have to take it only in that sense. My opinion is that whenever the jurisdiction of the civil court has come up for consideration, we have to see whether the special enactment which debars the jurisdiction of the civil court have adequate remedy to address the grievance of the party concerned. Take an example: Tamil Nadu Cooperative Societies Act, even the pollution laws, Sarfasi Act, and even HRNC Act. In all these the special enactments, there is a provision for exclusion of the civil code. So the normal rule is that ubi just ibi remedium. When there is a right, there is a remedy. So we cannot infer the exclusion of the jurisdiction of civil code. We have to always presume that the civil code has jurisdiction. The exclusion cannot be inferred. The person who is seeking exclusion has to prove that the civil court jurisdiction is barred. So this is the fundamental principle in respect of section 9 is concerned. And for before exclusion, there are few principles which has to be taken note of. Namely, first, whether the special enactment, which is self-contained code, provides a remedy of proper adjudication, appeal, and revision. That is the first principle we have to take note of. Secondly, the special enactment which gives a finality to the orders passed under the said act. Thirdly, whether the special enactment provides a complete machinery for deciding the rights of the parties concerned. Then finally, if there is the statutory tribunal or the statutory authority, if it has acted contrary to the settled judicial principles or a procedure contemplated under the law, then civil court can interfere. So these are all the limited scope of section 9. So you know well, right to approach the civil court is an inherent right. So we cannot prevent a party from approaching the court of law. But if the law specifically excludes the jurisdiction, then we cannot approach the civil court, and the remedy has to be worked out only before the authorities concerned. All of us know well that in service law we cannot maintain a suit because there is a disciplinary proceedings, there is an appeal remedy, revisional remedy. Then party has to approach the High Court by filing writ petition. So in respect of civil service matters, we cannot maintain a suit. Similarly, in Sarfasi Act also, you know well that there is a clear bar under section 34 of the Sarfasi Act. So all the issues are incidental claims to be worked out only before the DRT under section 17 of the Act. Similarly, all the special provisions in INAM Act, you know well that if an order has been passed by the settlement officer, then there is an INAM tribunal, namely the subcourt, against which we can approach the High Court before division bench, a special appellate tribunal. But the civil court jurisdiction cannot be invoked readily for the purpose of going into that issue. But law has been settled. Even in INAM cases, the adjudication of remedy is confined only to the provisions of that act alone. If a party has independent right, he can maintain a suit. There are exclusions, there are judgments to that effect also. How the civil court jurisdiction has to be excluded, and how whether it is impliedly or explicitly barred have been dealt with a number of cases. There are at least 5 or 6 constitutional bench judgments in this aspect also. I will give a few decisions, and also I will quote the latest one also. AR 1964 Supreme Court 322, AR 1964 Supreme Court 322 Constitutional Bench, AR 1965 Supreme Court 1942 Constitution Bench, AR 1966 Supreme Court, 66 Supreme Court 249 Constitution Bench. AR 1969 Supreme Court 78 is also a constitutional bench. Then 2005 10 SEC 760, 2005 10 SEC 760. Very recently, the Honorable Supreme Court reiterated the views taken by the constitutional bench in two decisions, namely 2020 12 SEC 562, 2020 12 SEC 562, 2020 12 SEC 680. Ultimately, the courts have held that the adequacy and sufficiency of the remedies is the only issue which has to be taken note of for the purpose of conferring or excluding the jurisdiction of the civil court. So always civil court jurisdiction is maintainable. We cannot readily exclude the jurisdiction of the civil court. If the civil court jurisdiction is excluded or not can be gone into by reading the entire scheme of the special enactment. Suppose if you want to file a suit in respect of touching the Cooperative Societies Act, you have to find out whether the jurisdiction of the civil court has been exclusively excluded, namely section 156. And what is the exclusion clause? Whether all the rights between the members and society is excluded, or this only the limited portion has been excluded, have to be gone into by reading the entire scheme of the act. So you take note of these decisions. Whenever a issue has come up, you please try to see that the civil court jurisdiction is conferred. If you want to exclude, then there must be a specific exclusion clause. And the law has been settled. If a person pleads that the civil court jurisdiction is excluded, it is for the person who is alleging that to prove it. So the burden is upon the person who is taking their plea that the civil court jurisdiction is ousted. Then there are another judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in AR 1997, 1997 1 SEC 68, 1997 1 SEC 68. There is a judgment also. You please keep it in mind. Then we'll go to section 10 CPC. Section 10 says that no court shall proceed with the trial of any suit in which the matter in issue is also directly and substantially in issue in a previously instituted suit between the same parties or between the parties under whom they or any of them claim litigating under the same title, where the proceedings is pending in the same or any other court. So for invoking section 10 of CPC, we have to find out what are all the basic elements. One, the suit must be pending between the same parties. There must be first suit and second suit. There must be two suits pending between the same parties or their successors in interest. Secondly, matter in issue in the latter suit must be directly and substantially issued in the former suit. So the first suit was filed in respect of the very same property, in respect of the very same issue. Similarly, the second suit should have been filed for the very same subject matter. Third, both the suits must be pending before the court of law. If it is already disposed of, then it may not have any application. Fourth one, parties must be litigating under the same title. When these four ingredients are met, then it is always desirable to stay the second suit. In fact, the very object of section 10 is to avoid parallel trials in respect of the same issue. There must be only one adjudication in respect of one property between the same parties, and we cannot multiply the filing of suits in respect of the very same subject matter in issue. Therefore, section 10 enables the parties to file an application under section 10 to stay the subsequently filed suit. Regarding this, I have two decisions. One, 2012 3 CTC 2012 3 CTC 241, 2013 3 CTC 667, 2013 3 CTC 667, then 2006 4 CTC, 2006 4 CTC 556. So the purpose is to avoid parallel conducting of two trials in respect of the very same property. Take an example. Suppose RCOP is filed or a suit for eviction is filed on one ground. Pending that suit, if another ground has come on different cause of action, you can maintain the second suit, which was not even pleaded in the first suit. There is no bar. So we have to take note of. We are not supposed to consider the prior. We are supposed to take note of what is the foundation of the claim in the said suit. If the suits both the suits in respect of the very same subject matter between the very same parties litigated under the same title, then it is desirable to stay the second suit. So this is the fundamental principles of law laid down under section 10 of CPC. Then we'll go to section 11. Section 11 is a very important provision in respect of civil trial is concerned. Let us read what section 11 says. Section 11 reads like this: no court shall try any suit or issue in which the subject matter directly and substantially in issue has been directly and substantially in issue in a former suit between the same parties or between the parties under whom they or any of them claims are litigating under the same title in a court of competent jurisdiction to try, and subsequent suit or the suit in which such issue has been substantially raised and has been heard and finally decided by the court. But this is the definition of rejudicata. Let us read the provision slowly, one after another, to find out what are all the basic ingredients for rejudicata. The first principle is: no court shall try any suit or issue in which the matter directly and substantially has been directly and substantially in issue a former suit. So the issue in both these suits must be directly and substantially the same. So that is the first principle in respect of rejudicata. Second principle is between the same parties, that adjudication between the same parties or between the parties under whom they or any of them claims title. One suit, earlier suit have been filed by father and the subsequent suit have been filed by son or daughter. It is clearly hit by section 11. So 11 says between the same parties or between parties under whom they or any of them claim. Even a purchaser from the parties under the earlier suit is also prevented under section 11. Then third principle, litigating under the same title. So both the suits and parties must be litigating under the same title. Then fourth one, in a court of competent jurisdiction, the jurisdiction of the court is very important. Both the suits must be pending before, or first should have been tried by the court of competent jurisdiction. Then last one, the issue has been heard and finally decided. So the issue should have been heard and finally decided between the parties. So these are all the 5 basic ingredients of section rejudicata. So the very purpose of section 11 is the earlier adjudication is conclusive in the same subject matter between the same parties. Earlier adjudication is conclusive between the same subject matter between the same parties. That is the fundamental principles of section 11. Then section 11 contains various explanations. Let us go one by one. First explanation says the expression former suit shall denote a suit which has been decided prior to the suit in question, whether or not it has been instituted prior thereto. In order to invoke section 11, it is immaterial whether the suit was filed earlier or later. It makes no difference. A would have filed a suit in 1999. the subsequent suit would have been filed in 2005, but the 2005 suit would have been tried and disposed of earlier. In such a case, the suit which was filed earlier in 1999 could hit by the adjudicata. So the date of filing is immaterial. Date of decision taken, date of judgment is the relevant criteria. Even the suit would have been filed later, but the decision would have been given in the second suit. Then it will operate as adjudicata. So the date of filing has no significance. Only the date of disposal is the criteria for the purpose of deciding the first suit and subsequent suit. So that is the first limp of explanation to section 11. Then second explanation. For the purpose of this section, the competence of court shall be determined irrespective of any provision as to a right of appeal from the decision of such court. So the court must have a competent jurisdiction to try. If the court has no pecuniary or territorial jurisdiction, then it has no adjudicata principle has no application at all, irrespective of the right of appeal provided under the Act. That is the explanation 2. Then explanation 3, matter. The matter means the subject matter in the suit. The matter above referred to must be in the former suit have been alleged by one party and either denied or admitted expressly or implied by the other. So that is the explanation 3. So the matter in the former suit must be the same as that of the matter in the second suit between the same parties. That's what explanation 3. Explanation 4 is very, very important. Any matter which might or ought to have been made a ground of defense or attack in a former suit shall be deemed to have matter directly or substantially in an issue on this such suit. What does it mean? I will give an example. If a plaintiff has filed a suit for declaration and injunction, then the defendant claims that the plaintiff was not in possession and he is not the title holder. The possession would have been with the plaintiff, but the defendant, being the owner, would have lost his chance of filing cross objection in the earlier suit. In such a case, after dismissal of the first suit on merits, the plaintiff in the first suit is debarred from filing a fresh suit on the basis of on respect of the very same property, because explanation 4 is very clear. The matter which might and ought to have been made a ground of defense or attack. The matter which might and ought to have been made a ground of defense or attack in the earlier suit. That means the defendant in the first suit ought to have filed a cross objection for possession from the plaintiff, and the defendant in the first suit will never get possession merely because the earlier suit filed by the plaintiff for declaration and injunction is dismissed, and the defendant ought to have filed a cross objection in the first suit itself for possession. If he has not filed, then he is debarred from maintaining the suit subsequent to the dismissal of the earlier suit for possession. So all the defenses available should have been raised in the first suit itself, and he should have made a counterclaim to get the property from his possession. That is the considered adjudicata. Take an example: if a person has filed a suit not to bear injunction, not to disturb except by due process of law, the defendant, being the owner, know well that the plaintiff has not proved his title or not proved his the right over the property, then the defendant is not supposed to keep quiet by simply defending the said suit, because he know well that he is the owner of the property. He know well that the possession is with the defendant. So he has to file a counterclaim in the first suit itself. Merely defending the first suit for injunction is of no use, because even assuming that the suit is dismissed, the defendant is not going to get the property. So the defendant has to file another suit. So such course of action is clearly hit by explanation 4. I am going to give some more examples little later. Then explanation 5. Any relief claimed in the plaint which is not expressly granted by the degree shall, for the purpose of this section, be deemed to have been refused. This is also very quite interesting. Suppose you have filed a suit for different reliefs. The earlier suit would have been for declaration, possession, or injunction not to alienate, or injunction not to interfere. While granting relief, the court would have granted only 2 or 3 reliefs. The other reliefs would have been omitted without even reference. So the explanation 5 clearly says that any relief claimed in the suit which is not expressly granted in the degree, it is not expressly granted in the degree, then you cannot maintain the second suit for getting that relief. Suppose if you file a suit for declaration and the recovery of possession, suit has been decreed only in respect of declaration. Court has not even mentioned anything about the possession. Then in such a case, it is for you to file an appeal before the appellate court to get it set aside. You cannot ignore the first suit and cannot file a second suit for possession on the ground that there was no reference in the first degree. So explanation 5 is very clear. So even if you have asked, but that relief has not been claimed, would operate as a rejudicata unless that finding is challenged before the court of appeal in the manner known to law. In explanation 6, where persons litigate bona fide in respect of public right or private right claimed in common for themselves and others, all persons interested in such suit shall, for the purpose of the section, be deemed to claim under the person so litigating. This is in respect of public nuisance suit for public nuisance, section 91 CPC, or suit in respect of representative capacity. You know well whether when the suit was filed in the representative capacity under order on rule 8, explanation 5, we were dealing with the explanation 5 to section 11. When persons litigate between the litigate bona fide in respect of a public right or of a private right claimed in common for themselves and others. So as I said, the suits filed in the representative capacity or suits filed under section 91 for removal of public nuisance, all will come within the purview of this clause. You know well that in a representative capacity suit has been filed, then the judgment delivered is judgment in rem. It has a universal application. It is not a judgment in personam. That means will have bearing over the parties to the litigation. Whereas representative suits are concerned, the judgment delivered therein would be construed as judgment in rem. That is, it has universal binding on the all the villages concerned. So, in a suit of that nature, whether for private right or public right, if judgment has been given between the persons interested, it is binding on both the parties and their successors in interest. You have already seen section 11. Not only between the parties to the suit or the persons who are claiming right under them. So merely because the earlier suit was filed by the original owner, then the legal heir of that original owner or the purchaser from the original owner cannot maintain the second suit. He is also debarred under section 11 from maintaining the suit. Then comes explanation 7. The provisions of this section shall apply to a proceeding for the execution of a degree, and reference to this section to any suit, issue, or format suit shall be construed as references respectively to a proceeding for the execution of a degree, question arising in such proceeding, and a former proceeding for the execution of the degree. It is nothing but the rejudicata bar is equally applicable to the execution proceedings also. So the suit, the execution petition once filed, and we have to pursue that. If it is decided one way or other, then the second execution application is also not maintainable in view of section explanation 7. Then explanation 8 deals with the court of limited jurisdiction. Even if the court of limited jurisdiction has dealt with the res judicata principle is applied. I will come to that little later because I am going to refer that this is not only confined to the civil courts and it is also applicable to the other proceedings, namely petition or even proceedings pending before authorities. This res judicata principle is applied. Section 11 stricto sense may not apply, but res judicata is applied. So once a issue has been adjudicated between the parties on the very same issue, then it cannot be relitigated, either before civil court or even before the other authorities concerned. So that is the purpose of explanation 8. There is one classic judgment of the Honorable Bombay High Court which I have not given in my notes. You please take note of AR 1997 Bombay, AR 1997 Bombay 79. 1997 Bombay 79. It's a classic judgment. Though the principles of law is the same as referred to in the judgment of Supreme Court, which I have given in my notes. But this Bombay High Court judgment has elaborately discussed about the scope and ambit of Section 11. So the Bombay High Court has held the res judicata, doctrine of res judicata is based on 5 maxims. They have given 5 maxims also. The first is that no man should be vexed twice for the same cause. No man should be vexed twice for the same cause. The second, it is the interest of the state that there should be an end to the litigation. There must be an end to the litigation. 3, judicial decision must be accepted as correct. Judicial decision must be accepted as correct. 4th one suit and one decision is enough for any single dispute. One suit and one decision is enough for any single dispute. Lastly, the act of the court does not cause harm to no one. The act of the court shall cause no harm to anyone. And these are all the fundamental principles of law based on 5 maxims have been set out in the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. The concept of res judicata is based on a legal maxim. Res judicata pro, P-R-O, pro, veritate, V-E-R-I-T-A-T-E, V-E-R-I-T-A-T-E, accipitur, A-C-C-I-P-I-T-U-R, A-C-C-I-P-I-T-U-R. This is the legal maxim now that has been reduced to res judicata. Then the earliest judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in AR 1966 Supreme Court 941, AR 1966 Supreme Court 941, the Supreme Court has clearly laid down that rule of conclusiveness of the judgment is the very foundation of the res judicata. So there must be a conclusiveness in every litigation. Parties cannot be vexed twice on the self-same cause of action. As we see under section 300 of CRPC, atrophies no one can be tried for the same cause. The same analogy is also applicable. This is almost similar to that of Order to Rule 2. Order to Rule 2 also, you know well that once a suit is filed on the basis of a particular cause of action and the priors have been made, then finality should be arrived at, and parties cannot be allowed to go for a second litigation, provided the court has granted permission or leave has been granted in the earlier suit itself to sue the remaining relief. So it is almost similar to that of. Then the next judgment, 1976 4 SEC, 1976 4 SEC 780, which I have given, 2004 3 SEC 277. This is the judgment of Supreme Court. It says that no one should be vexed twice for the same cause of action. Secondly, it concerns the state that there must be an end to the lawsuits. The same principle as the Bombay High Court has laid down. Then 2008 9 SEC 54. 2008 9 SEC 54. Res judicata even for a wrong decision. Decision may be wrong unless it is tested in the manner known to law before the appellate court. The decision has to be treated as a res judicata in the subsequent litigation. For neither the parties nor their successors in interest cannot ignore the judgment on the ground that the decision is wrong, or it was taken on a wrong principle of law, or on the basis of incorrect facts. That it can't be cited. But there is an exception. The res judicata will apply to a wrong decision. There is no dispute, but subject to the restrictions. Namely, if a decision rendered by a court without jurisdiction is a nullity. If even a wrong decision is a binding, no doubt. But if a wrong decision was taken by a court which has no jurisdiction, then it is not res judicata, has no application. Similarly, a decision was obtained by playing fraud, then even we can ignore the wrong decision. So this is the law laid down by Supreme Court in 2008, 9 SEC 54. The next decision, 2009, 10 SEC 273, 2009, 10 SEC 273, and 2017, 13 SEC, 2017, 13 SEC 138. These two decisions speaks about res judicata principle is not only applicable to the civil proceedings, it is also applicable to the other proceedings. As I said already, stricto sense section 11 may not apply, but res judicata concept will apply. Take an example. If revenue authorities or even any statutory authority or even a writ petition, a matter has been adjudicated and a decision was taken, then it cannot be re-agitated on the very same cause. So the res judicata principle is also applicable to all other proceedings. That is what the Supreme Court has held in these two decisions. So let us not confine the res judicata under section 11 to the civil suits alone. Even to other proceedings, it is applicable. Then 2015, 1 SEC 665, 2015, 1 SEC 665. Subsequent res judicata applicable to the subsequent stages of the same proceedings. Subsequent stages of the same proceedings. Take an example. If a party died, any one of the party to the litigation died, steps have been taken. The legal heirs application was filed to bring the LRs on record. There was dispute. There was no dispute raised in respect of the LRs. You know well, if any dispute has been raised regarding the LRs, it should be decided then and there under Order 22, Rule 5. We cannot ignore simply by saying that it is only LR application, therefore no prejudice should be caused. It is not correct. Order 22, Rule 5 is very clear. Any dispute regarding the legal heirship should be decided then and there. If the respondent in the petition has not raised the dispute as to the LR, and if no inquiry was held under Order 22, Rule 5, that issue cannot be raised later, is the view taken by the Supreme Court. Similarly, there are exceptions to that also. Take an example, Order 26, Rule 9 application. Suppose commission application was filed. Application to reissue the commission warrant or scrap the report was filed, and it was decided one way or other, and it was questioned by way of revision before High Court. A decision was taken. That doesn't mean that the validity of the commission report cannot be gone into in the main suit. It can be. There is no bar at all. Similarly, if an application to receive a document was filed before the trial court, that application was dismissed. You know well that the appeal, you can invoke an application under Order 41 or 27 to file the very same document which was not entertained by the trial court, because Order 41 to 27, the first limb clearly says that application filed and not taken on file can be entertained in the at the appeal stage. So we can't say that the res judicata is applicable. So the Supreme Court has carefully said in the following lines: where the trial court or the higher court decided the matter in one way, will not allow the parties to relitigate the matter again in a subsequent stage of the same proceedings. But it will not preclude the appellate court from correcting the errors. This is what I am trying to say. So, I will give you another example. Suit was, order was passed. Order 9 Rule 7 application was filed. It was dismissed and later appealed by the High Court. Then thereafter ex parte degree was passed. Then we can't maintain Order 9 Rule 13 because that the options was already taken note of, and the courts have held that you are not entitled to get a fresh opportunity. So we have to see the nature of the order and the adjudication for the purpose of applying this principle as to whether the adjudicata will apply in the subsequent stages of the same proceedings. So this is what the Supreme Court has held. You can take note of yet another judgment, AR 1964 Supreme Court 993. AR 1964 Supreme Court 993. Under 2015, you have already noted 2015 1 SCC 665. In both these cases, the Supreme Court has taken the view that res judicata is applicable to the subsequent stages of the same proceedings, subject to the rider, which I have already explained. Then 2015 3 SCC 624, 2015 3 SCC 624. In this case, the Supreme Court has laid down the five principles which we have already dealt with at the time of explaining section 11. Let me read once again for easy understanding. In the 2015 3 SCC 624 and AR 1966 Supreme Court 1332, AR 1966 Supreme Court 1332. In that case, the Supreme Court has laid down the following principles. 1. Matter directly and substantially in issue in the subsequent suit must be the same matter in the former suit. So the same matter is the significant factor. Secondly, former suit must have been between the same parties or parties under whom any of them claim title. So the parties must be the one and the same. Third, parties must have litigated under the same title. So the same title is the third significant factor. Fourth, former suit must have been decided by a court of competent jurisdiction. Court of competent jurisdiction. The last one, matter directly and substantially issue in the subsequent suit must have been heard and decided in the first suit. So these are all the first 5 principles which are very much explicit from the reading of section 11 CPC. So you keep this in your mind whenever res judicata principle has come up for consideration. Then whether res judicata will apply between the co-defendants. You may the parties or plaintiff and defendant is one aspect. If between these co-defendants, whether res judicata principle is applicable. Yes, it is applicable, which is this decision 2019-17 SCC 433. 2019-17 SCC 433. To apply whether the res judicata principle is applicable between the co-defendants, 3 ingredients of interest between the defendants. If the defendants have taken same standard or colluded together, then the res judicata will not apply. So there must be conflict between the co-defendants in the first suit. Secondly, question between the defendant must have been finally decided. So the defendants taken in the former suit between the defendants should have been decided finally. Third one, it must be necessary to decide this conflict in order to give the plaintiff the relief claimed. So the earlier suit, the relief should have been granted in favor of the plaintiff. So these are all the 3 ingredients in respect of application of res judicata between the co-defendants. Then comes next. If you file a suit, one suit you have filed, cross objection you would have filed. Then when appeal was suit was decreed, or cross objection would have been dismissed. If the defendant wants to file an appeal, he can file one first appeal before the first appellate court. So that is the law laid down by our court in 2011 3 MWN 509. 2011 3 MWN 509. So the basic suit is only one suit. The cross objection was filed. Then when appeal was filed, one first appeal is enough. This was the law laid down by the Madras High Court. There are contra views by the Honorable Supreme Court, but there is no reference about cross appeal. In all the other decision which I am going to refer before you is when there more than one suits have been tried together, a common judgment was delivered. And take an example, plaintiff has filed one suit, defendant has filed another suit, both were tried together, and the plaintiff suit was, the first suit was declared, second suit was dismissed. If the defendant has to file appeal, then he has to file two appeals, one against the dismissal of his suit and also challenging the degree granted in the first suit filed by the plaintiff. So there must be two appeals before the appellate court. This was the view taken by the Honorable Supreme Court in AR 1966 Supreme Court 1332. AR 1966 Supreme Court 1332, 4 judges bench judgment. Then 1962 Supreme Court 338, AR 1962 Supreme Court 338, AR 1953 Supreme Court 419, 53 Supreme Court 419, AR 1993 Supreme Court 1202, AR 1993 Supreme Court 1202. So therefore, if a common judgment is delivered, there must be separate appeals against each one of the degrees granted. I have already said cross objection, but none of these judgments of the Supreme Court dealt with about cross objection. But only judgment of Madras High Court says Supreme Court decisions are otherwise. Then no res judicata in respect of case of fraud played. AR 1995 Supreme Court 1995 Supreme Court 1205. If any fraud was played in the first suit, res judicata has no application. Then decision in more than one point will operate res judicata. Suit would have been dismissed, ultimately filed by the plaintiff, but the findings therein would have adversely affected the interests of the defendant. That would also operate res judicata. AR 1963 Supreme Court 385. AR 1963 Supreme Court 385, AR 1971 Supreme Court 442, 71 Supreme Court 442. So this is in respect of res judicata is concerned. Thank you very much. Thank you for the listeners and Mr. Triyana Samal.